And good afternoon to those of you on YouTube. This is the Senate Committee on Government Operations Committee meeting of the first day of May 2026. And we are going to take up Senate Bill 324 today. I'm sure it will be amended or have different provisions in it as we go through it. But this is an act relating to legislative operations and government accountability. We're very happy that we have back the Deputy State Auditor, Tim Ash, former Senator, former Pro Tem, and someone who's well versed in the goings on in this building and should definitely help us as we hopefully will be able to get to a finish line with something this year in terms of government accountability. So welcome back, Tim, and it's great to see you.
Thank you, Chair Collmore and committee members. I'm at your mercy in terms of how you'd like me to contribute here. I did a review of S324 as introduced. It obviously looks familiar to some work the Senate has done just a couple years ago, I feel like, but didn't make it through on maybe through the Appropriations Committee, but so it's content I'm familiar with. And some of the discussion points from this past Friday, I think I'll just highlight. The other body in H67 obviously tried to work with an existing structure, the Joint Fiscal Committee, as the repository of work done in this vein. I picked up very quickly that this committee didn't look on that approach particularly favorably. So I don't need to tread that ground again. I think from my point of view, there are elements in 324 which are interesting and maybe even good to do, but aren't absolutely critical to the discussion about whether to advance a system of tackling accountability moving forward. The grants piece near the latter portion of the bill is interesting. Maybe you've done some work on that in another context, but not critical for this discussion. The direction to the auditor's office to provide some support to a newly created joint committee, that would be fine. We would do it anyways, probably, but so that I won't focus on that. The intro language is sort of fine, but I'm not going to focus on that. So really the question becomes whether to create a new committee of any kind to apply to this new, more systemic approach to having follow through and accountability and oversight of particularly significant activities passed by the legislature. The options, just to put it back on the table, one is you could adopt what the House has done, have the Joint Fiscal Committee be the place that kind of oversees the work of some staff at the Joint Fiscal Office and Ledge Council. You could have all the same work that is in H67 be directed to the two government operations committees and just come up with language that has them authorized, or some members of them, to meet in the off season and carry out the work. That's another option if you want to have the committees of jurisdiction, which even H67 looks to for some structure and feedback. Just have it be the government operations committee members, either in their entirety, or maybe 3 members from each chamber, something like that. So that's another option. Or you can go with a newly created joint oversight committee as laid out in the bill. I don't have a sense of whether the committee wants to go down that road again. I think as it was constructed, all the basics of it, how many members from each chamber, trying to have them from different parties, all of that seems, pretty well conceived. There had been debate in the past about what constitutes an issue of significant concern as it's defined in the bill. I think that It's like the old Supreme Court adage, although I don't need to recite the whole thing, but you know it when you see it. But I think that whether that those big issues that either a joint committee, an existing set of jurisdictional committees, or the Joint Fiscal Committee would look at could still go through that identification process laid out in H67. It could be using the definition that you have in the bill. It could be something that leadership in the two chambers identifies. It could be something that the Joint Rules Committee identifies. Joint Rules being a committee that includes leadership of the major and minority and majority parties and the speaker and pro tem. So in some sense has that broad nonpartisan quality to it, which I know is one of the interests in the bill. So before I just start drifting off, I'll stop there and say I hope I've just queued up a few of the things, and I, in some ways, could probably be more helpful once I get a sense of where you hope to head.
Okay, sure enough. I saw Senator Biegovsky writing down questions, so I know she's got some.
I was actually writing down ideas as I'm looking over 324. I would love to sort of, as Tim was talking and kind of as I was just percolating in my brain. I will say Joint Rules doesn't have representation from all of the minor parties. I mean, minor parties.
True.
It has representation from the Democrats and the Republicans. There's no progressive representation on.
No, but you said all the minor parties. I'm just curious, how many more minor parties are there?
I don't speak for that. You can certainly answer. I think she meant there's no progressive.
That's what I meant.
There was the new parties being formed.
I mean, at one point, I know there was libertarian in the House. But I just want to point out that there's no progressive representation on Joint Rules. That is neither, well,
Here nor there.
not at the moment.
It's there.
I'm wondering, Tim, as I'm looking at the bill, if what I hear you saying is that we could strike section 6, which is the recommendations for state grant process improvements for the time being. Then I'm wondering, as I'm moving upward in the bill, if we could strike, hold on, sorry. In section 3, we heard some testimony yesterday from the chief performance officer that they are recommending we repeal the report on genuine progress indicators and the performance and accountability requirements in contracts and grants, and instead take some of the language from those and put it into the outcomes report. So I would suggest we do that in this bill.
Yeah.
And then maybe striking the powers section. So that is section 2, maybe. Hold on, it's a long section. Yeah, that is section 2, but the part I'm suggesting be struck is way at the bottom of the section. It begins at the top of page 6, and that's where we grant the joint committee, sub B, the joint committee, the power, the subpoena and deposition sort of powers. And part of the reason I'm suggesting striking that is I know that that has been a sticking point, and technically the Senate could grant any committee those powers in a specific instance. So I'm wondering if that
really?
Yes.
No, Matt.
Yeah. The Senate by constitution has subpoena power, and if we wanted to give a standing committee subpoena power or make a committee and give it subpoena power, we do so by resolution with a simple majority vote.
So I would like to put a pin in that and actually think about that in terms of our sheriffs.
I thought the Judiciary Committee already could do it though.
No, but we anyway, as put a pin in that for further discussion.
So striking sub B in section 2. And then
Go on. I'm sorry.
go ahead. You can go ahead if you have response to this.
Well, sub B, I think, has been a real sticking point in the past, and I think, as you say, it adds little value in the short term, but raises a lot of fears. And I will say that early in my Senate tenure, there was at least the threat of subpoenas being issued by the Senate Judiciary Committee for some issue or another. But yeah, I would leave that elsewhere.
Okay. And then In terms of, the sort of question of what does the committee do? How does it decide what it's going to work on? I think there's sort of potentially two avenues. You've named one, maybe allowing the rules committee, although I would appreciate full representation of all major parties on that committee. Allowing them to choose an issue, but sort of tasking this joint oversight and accountability committee with tackling one or two things per biennium. The other option, I think, is we could name it in here. We, the GovOps committee, could pick and say in their first year, they'll do this. Do you have any thoughts on that?
If you were going to go that route, the committee, I'm imagining the bill gets to the Senate floor, and the first thing that happens is members of your chamber say, well, why did you get to pick those things? How did you decide on those things? So it, in a way, recreates the problem of what will this committee look at? You know what I mean? So if you were going to list them in there, I think it would make the most sense to make sure you have buy-in from the outset from either leadership of the current majority and minority parties, or Senate leadership or committee chair, something to get buy-in before you get to the floor, where you'll spend most of your time trying to explain why you had the right to pick and no one else got to weigh in. That would be my worry if you went that route.
That is fair.
Senator Clarkson.
So I'd actually like to think a little bit outside the box, because I think the best thing is a joint oversight. Having thought about this a tiny bit, I think creating a joint oversight committee, all the joint oversight committees, this is a great one to actually have. And I actually think what we're failing to do in this is not include all of government. And I think we should have, if we're going to do joint oversight, I mean, if we're going to do review all of state government, I think we would be wise for us to consider having members of the administration and the judiciary. And I think looking at both the ethics commission and turning to, I agree with Tim. I don't think you go in with a preset of what to review. I think you need to create a process by which you identify what needs to be reviewed, because until you have sort of an objective, just the way we have the consumer program in the consumer protection program in the AG's office, which gives us ideas of what consumer pieces we need to be protecting every year. We need a way, an objective way, to have ideas filtered through and come to this joint oversight committee that we would then choose from. But I think if it's going to be joint oversight of state government, it should include all of state government. Shouldn't just be legislators. That is, so I put that out for thought. And I think one of their first jobs would be to figure out what way they would, what process they would create to identify the issues to work on. I mean, one of the people that should be on the committee is Justin, is the, chief performance officer. I think that's critical to be on it. But I think, like the Secretary of Administration, I just think that there are key other objective eyes that could be brought to bear on how all state governments functions.
Senator, if I might react to that just quickly, as you know, our office does not set policy, so we're here merely to offer feedback. But if this is a legislative oversight committee, our belief is that it should be made up of and led by legislators, because you are overseeing the executive and maybe judicial branches. If they are members of the committee, they would effectively be overseeing themselves, which is not really oversight, if you follow my logic. So it's certainly appropriate that individuals would be interacting with an oversight committee, that they'd be providing information, but they have their own work to do to make sure that systems are in place internal to the executive branch to deliver effective government. This is about the legislature overseeing that work.
I apologize. I hadn't really thought about it as just a legislative committee. I thank you for that. of course, if it's a legislative oversight committee, then we wouldn't. I was thinking of it as government oversight, so apologies. I hadn't focused on the fact it was just.
Well, and I think it is doing oversight of the government, but it is using our, again, I believe it's constitutional role as the legislature and the separate branch of government to oversee. So I think we're doing full government oversight, but we're doing our job as legislators to do that, if that makes any sense. Because I was actually going to make the same point Tim made, is that by putting them on the committee, we're saying, hey, come join us in overseeing yourself.
Right, but I do think it's important for the committee to figure out a way that, a process by which they identify the areas they want to address.
Mhm.
I don't think we should prescribe for them what to look at. Because I think they need a system for identifying what needs work.
And so if I am correct, Tim, on page 4, beginning on line 9, under the subchapter 972 duties and powers, subset 1A, the committee shall exercise government oversight by examining and investigating matters of significant public concern. That would be the place where we would want to define what that means.
So
Yeah, and you have beginning on line 20 is an attempt to define that.
Yeah.
Whether that's the most artful way of describing it, I think the goal was to say that these are significant financial or human issues.
Page 5, well, on page 4, on page.
Yeah, I guess my question with that is, the first one is affects the state as a whole. What government programs and policies don't affect the state as a whole? Well, I mean, I guess the Brattleboro Police Project doesn't affect the state as a whole.
when the regional.
I having not written that, I am not in a position to defend the language. However, I think the idea was that this is not like intended for it to be individual members of the committee pursuing very parochial paths that perhaps are of high interest to that House or Senate member alone, but rather broadly, issues that are much broader. Because you could imagine the committee saying, "Oh, well, let's spend all our time looking at." If the chair of the committee happened to be from Chittenden County and there was something going on with the sheriff or something, suddenly there's this, using the committee to focus just on that office and goings on. I think this is intended policies that have, widespread reach, appropriations that are affecting, every corner of the state for sure.
So line 7 on that page, Tim, page 5. How often do we undergo a federal audit? Do you have any idea?
We each year from the state auditor's office perform the single audit, which is the audit of the state's use of federal funds, both for for compliance in a number of ways. There's also a number of audits that occur of specific programs throughout the year. They are not on some fixed schedule, and it sometimes feels a little, not random, but it almost feels out of the blue that they come. If you go to our website, there's a link to, or I'll email it to you all. We keep a running tab of the ones we're aware of where a federal agency has done an audit of a state department and their management of particular programs. So every year there are a bunch that occur. They sometimes have interesting findings. There's audits of the child support activities. There's audits of the Prison Rape Elimination Act compliance at the Department of Corrections. Different agricultural programs have federal audits from the USDA. AHS receives different audits from their Inspector General's office. So they happen pretty frequently over the course of a year.
Okay. And that says that there could be a failure to adequately respond. I'm not quite sure what that means either, but you've certainly.
I'll give you a good example, actually, and one that a committee like this would be well positioned to address. So we just did an audit of the Child Development Division's oversight of childcare facility inspection process and fingerprint compliance. And it has now been a handful of years that the feds have said to the state, you're out of compliance with the
Right.
federal rules around having fingerprint and background checks completed before individuals are allowed to work in federally funded childcare facilities. That has applied both to Head Start, which is the primary interest in the feds on this front, but also affects dollars that they send to the state of Vermont to generally provide administrative support for our childcare activities. So that is one that even before our office found that that's still a problem, a federal auditor had notified the state several times we're out of compliance and at risk of losing Head Start funding as a result. And you may or may not know that there are 2 Head Start facilities already that have received rather alarming letters saying if you don't meet this background check requirement, we are going to start pulling funds from you possibly. So one of them has stopped allowing people to work until those are completed, which means there's a delay in having the slots available. And other facilities continue to be in violation of the federal regs, and they're taking their chances, I guess, until the issue comes to a head.
So far, based on what I'm hearing, we have potentially struck section 6 out of the bill. That's the state grant process. We have a little bit above that in section, the subpoena power. Where did that go?
I think that was section 2 and then changes.
Yeah.
In
I just wanted somebody keep notes so we could tell. Is it Tim Devlin that? It might
Yeah,
be.
he's across the hall.
Well,
It is bad.
actually, this was a committee bill, so I don't know who drafted it, but
It is Tim Devlin.
okay. So,
Section 2, though, you don't want to strike section.
Not the whole
I'm
section, section
trying to find
2 sub B, I think it is.
its powers and
The committee
duties.
shall be composed of, I think
Oh,
we need
okay.
to update that, but I don't think we need to strike it.
Well,
Okay. No. So go all the way to page 6. At the
Oh, okay.
very end
there,
of section 2, sub little b.
line
Oh,
1
powers.
through 6.
All
Yes.
right, you're striking. but-
Yes. Those are the 2 that I recollecting quickly. There might have been another suggestion or 2.
Those are the only 2 I suggested striking at this
Okay.
point.
So, but if, you know, we're gonna be addressing some thorny things, this committee, and they'll be addressing things people don't want to say on the record.
Oh.
And then how do you get people to come and compel testimony and compel honesty about something if you, I mean, I would hope there would be measures before having to subpoena them, but you may need to subpoena them.
And we still could. We would simply have to ask the Senate to give us that power. And maybe down the road, once the committee has stood up and people realize that the committee is not all on a whip
And
bus,
trust it, and trust.
we
it.
could entrust these powers permanently to the
Right.
committee. But in terms of moving forward and doing something, I feel like at this point in time, striking that may make it more palatable.
So you'd strike all of me
Yes,
at this point.
at this point. I'm not saying the committee should never have those powers.
Yes, because I actually think depending on how effective this committee is, and until the ethics commission is actually out and functioning, in many ways, this will be dealing with some of the issues that
Maybe.
maybe. I mean, you know,
What- Well, one just addition, I mean, I think a worry in the past has been that this committee could think of itself as almost like a law enforcement committee. And I think that's the fear that was raised in the past. So I think removing it will help alleviate some of that concern. And I think seeing how things roll out will tell you whether it's sufficient as constructed, because the vast majority of information that's envisioned in this bill, in the core of section 2, are public. It's public information. It's just a matter of getting that performance kind of verified by Joint Fiscal Office and Legislative Council, and getting what you need when you need it. The question of what happens if the administration or the judiciary simply doesn't respond, that's a whole nother issue. And then you have to figure out how to compel their behavior. But since so much of the information is in fact public records, any citizen would have the right to access it. It would be hard for an administrative agency to justify not providing it to a group of legislators who are specifically put together for this work.
Senator White?
And also, I wonder if you got to the point where there was behavior or something that you needed to move down the avenue of a subpoena. My thought is, since it's public record, there's probably something criminal going on. And I would hope that a lawsuit or the judicial side of things could potentially take up the case.
I mean, the good news, Senator, is that like for the audits that we do, I think I've mentioned before, when we contact an agency and say, hey, we're from the auditor's office and we're here to audit you, there's a little bit of pause on the other end of the phone line. But once people get over that hump, we usually get all the information we request, and you get a rhythm with the agency that you're looking at, and they realize it's in everyone's interest to get the information out on the table and review it. They really aren't in a position to hide the information, so there's no point in trying to do so. It's really a matter sometimes of making sure that the requests are not so far-reaching that it takes huge effort to produce it in a timely manner. So I think you're on the right track to tease this out, like let something
Yeah, build trust.
work this out a few times, and you'll see if there's problems that need addressing after that.
But again, I think if we found ourselves in the instance where we were trying to do an investigation and we found ourselves with a hostile, we do have the power to then take that to the whole Senate and say, hey, can we have a subpoena for this issue? Because they're like, we're taking it away as a blanket allowance, because I think that people see subpoena and depositions and panic.
Yeah.
And so we do still have that ability if we found ourselves, which I think to the auditors, deputy auditors point, Freudian slip, I suppose. In all likelihood, that is going to be an incredibly rare instance where we have someone refusing to provide the information we're asking for. And so due to that, I think it's okay as we seek to build that cadence and that trust to rely on our existing subpoena power if we should need it.
Yeah, agreed.
So I'm just looking at the, this is on page 6, section 3. This is the chief performance officer. We did talk a little bit about having Justin Kenny, I think his last name, who is the chief performance officer, involved with this committee. I don't know whether we still have population level quality of life outcomes. At one point, GAC did have, I think there were 10
Yeah,
population level things, and then we had a way to measure whether those were being addressed. But I don't know, since this is existing law, whether those are still collected in the same fashion. But I guess we could have him come back in. Maybe you have an answer for that too.
Yeah, Senator, the information is still being collected and put on a report each year. I think while the information is being updated and the report has been improved a little bit as a result of some work we did with Justin's office, the indicators have kind of remained the same. Because GAC doesn't exist anymore, there's really no one to revise them. I think this language was really meant to just almost like a legislative conformance, in terms of modifying the name of the committee since GAC's gone.
But I do think since this is in here, having Justin come in, because as you recall, the testimony on the reports repeal, there was some testimony to make some changes to this report. So I think we could have him come in and help us massage this language to have him reporting what we want him reporting and involved in the way we want.
and involved in a way that he might have a good recommendation for how.
Yeah.
I would offer one word of caution, wearing multiple hats, including someone who's been in your shoes. Just bear in mind previous testimony including from your chair, that the discussion that you just envisioned having with Justin was one of the discussions that made people frustrated and kind of helped lead GAC to a place where people were not super energized to continue to serve on it. So just be careful if you go down that road, because it's a discussion that's spent years without resolution in the GAC process.
Sorry, you mean asking Justin's opinion?
No, the process of deciding what you want reported by Justin and what those indicators might look like, that was the work primarily of GAC for a handful of years that frustrated many of the members. And in the time you have in the session, just be careful before you go down that road.
Yeah. Anybody else have observations, questions, suggestions about the existing? This is a bill that's active. It's a committee bill.
Our committee bill, 324.
Correct.
Right. I think my note here is that, in addition, I think getting rid of, little B on the top of page 6 is a good idea. I think that, I like this more and more, but I have a note here, that this needs to be majorly improved. The top of page 5, that this whole section we could work on improving, and as we look at this, I have a big, all of it circled saying improve. So I think we might take a look at this piece of the charge next time we take it off, or right now. I don't know what time.
Well, Tim and I had talked before we went live. I'm hoping that I can release you all by 2:30, so you could head home. So we still have 25 minutes. Yeah,
Are we not doing 8:41?
we're not doing that today.
Yeah. Right.
The only other item I would just offer is the section on the report. This is unrelated to this new committee, but section, I think 5. Section 5 several years ago was a response from legislators who I think felt like the wave and crush of reports that come due in mid-January is not particularly useful in the sense that you're already becoming overwhelmed with legislative duties of the new session. So the idea was to try to get them front-loaded a little bit so that not only you could read them if you were interested with a little bit clearer heads, but also if there were legislative needs as a result of those reports, that they'd be in time for any filing deadlines, drafting deadlines. It does make it clear that if a report is specifically meant to be submitted by a date certain, that would remain. But for the ones that are sort of in that general category, that instead of January, they would come in November. I mentioned this only to say that while I think it's a really good thing, you may find that someone's going to come banging down the door and say, oh my God, that's a ton of reports and we don't think we can actually get them done that quickly. And so you just have to decide whether you want to jettison that section for now and return to it a different day.
Does the next portion alleviate, so it's little e there, if it becomes apparent to any agency, department, or other entity that's directed by the General Assembly to report blah, 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 that they will not be able to do so within the required time the reporting agency shall inform. So it sort of allows for them to be late as long as we are told that they're going to be late, why it's going to be late, and when it will be delivered.
Yeah, that it's helpful. Obviously, the idea is to structure it so that it's realistic. And if the Secretary of Administration or someone else was able to say, yeah, we think that most reports can be done by November, that's great. So it's just a comfort level. I'm flagging it because I'm guessing no one's come to talk about this particular provision because it's flying a little below the radar, but it would affect a lot of people's sort of the timing of when they do particular work in the off season at the agency level. So
I think we have done a lot of work on reports this year. Actually, we have a whole bill on reports and getting rid of them. And I think most of us now are trying to have reports due before the holiday season, before legislative council in particular has to draft a lot of this stuff. And for agencies who are in the middle of budgeting, to try and get out ahead of it. So I think a lot of us are moving towards asking for November deadlines, just naturally, but I think it's great to have it here, but I think that movement has already happened.
Okay, maybe you keep it and see if anyone complains.
Yeah,
Yeah, and if we were gonna think about removing that, I would actually want to still keep that little thing because I actually think that that is part of the challenge. And we've discovered it in our report repeal process when people have come in and they're like, well, we've never done that report. I'm like, okay, well, we were supposed to do it for the last 5 years. What do you mean you've just never done it? And so this language around like communicating if things are going to be late feels important to me no matter what.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. It's both rulemaking and reports, frankly, where there's often good reasons why something can't get done on time. It's the frustration is when you don't find out about it until 2 months later or 3 months later. And
Yeah. Would you suggest adding a similar provision around rulemaking and communication if the rules are going to be late?
it's it would certainly be make it consistent on. So, and it shouldn't be hard for Tim Devlin to do so. It would probably be under it's a different section of statute.
Because they're in charge of the administrative rules. So the way it's laid out in terms of composition on page 3, there's 4 members of the House, 4 members of the Senate, 2 at large from each chamber. If I'm counting correctly, that's 12.
2 at large, that means alums, like Jim and I could be appointed.
Yeah. Well, no, 2 at large from each chamber.
So it was in each, the Senate and the House.
It's
Well, they're already
worded,
4 members, they're already 8 members.
it's
Yes, worded.
worded very strangely because it also sets out by saying there will be 8 members.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Also be like.
And also there should be 9, we want odd numbers, you don't want even
Right.
numbers.
Let me just read that again. 4
So one alumni member,
more than
I
2.
think one alumni member would be critically important.
Who
for
are you gonna put on
perspective.
there?
In addition to 2 members at large appointed in each chamber, 1 appointment shall be made. Gosh,
I think all they mean is 1 each from the 2 specified committees, and then 2 other people.
Yes.
So it's 8.
So,
And I agree with Senator Clarkson. Normally, we would have an odd number of
yes,
members.
well, that's the minority member party.
But then who gets which chamber? I think a lot of our joint committees are even.
Joint committees are generally
chamber has the
even.
same number of appointees.
But then there'd be an opportunity for an alumni member. That could, would
Are you
have
gonna
all
come
that
back
rich,
with
the rich perspective.
I'm trying to get on this
Yeah,
committee.
Becky, you haven't
Alex,
figured
because
this out
I,
yet?
I,
Why don't you just run again?
exactly. I don't think we're gonna have time for this just on a.
I'm good, Chelsea.
Okay.
No, but always,
I
starting at cooking school and being a guardian and I think you'll be busy.
Yeah.
Allison, you could put in a reverse per diem. So you have to pay to serve as a non-legislative member.
Oh, she do it.
I think there, we could think about what a 9th member would be, but it's always good to have odd numbers.
No, and I appreciate that. It just all of our joint committees are even number of committees because.
Doesn't
didn't
mean
know
they're right, it just means that's what they are, it just doesn't mean going forward, we can.
Harvard's committees.
Mhm.
Anyway,
Yeah, because which chamber gets to have the extra member? I mean, we're writing the bill, so I would obviously say the Senate.
anyway, we can think about it, I just think we should think about that, and I think we want to include, that we have a balance of parties. And obviously it says, no more than 2 from the same party, but I also think we want to make sure all parties are represented in one way or another. And my thoughts on the
The
composition.
committee on committees could make that determination. On our side.
Yeah. If we have, yeah.
I don't know where, oh,
Well, so
speaker, okay.
given that the issues that we're dealing with, to Senator Clarkson's point, may be thorny, and there has been some concern that this committee could be used as sort of a political witch hunt tool. I actually think it is really important that all of our parties be represented. And it's actually not even coming, like, I know that there have been conference committees, for example, where the P I put after my name has been used to exclude a Republican from the Senate, because technically I don't, like, So it's not just to protect me. It is,
I'm saying, the
Sometimes
the
you're-
language says
Sometimes
not
I'm-
more than two shall be from the same party. So if the committee on committees and the speaker decide that there should be a Dem, a P, and a Republican, he or she or they can make that determination and so appoint.
yeah, I just think again, as a trust building mechanism, it may make sense in this bill to actually explicitly say that all parties shall be represented.
One where,
Unless, of course, there is a time when there is no representation in the chamber.
Or what if there's 4 parties?
Then I guess there's,
We won't have 8 members, we'll have 10.
well, no, then you would have one member from each of the 4 parties represented as your 4 representatives.
may or may not, I mean, and the problems you also have specific committees, that some of them are coming from, so. I think we can flag these, let's flag things we
You
want
don't have
to.
to make the final decisions.
I'd also like to go to, the sections we wanted to improve, and I would really, on the top of page 5, and I'd really love to have us think about what the charge would be. I would think one of the first things we would want to do, and I think it would be incorporated here in duties and powers, one of the first duties is to identify a process to establish the areas of government for review. And I think that will really be one of the first things, thoughtful things that we do to figure out.
How do you define areas of government?
Well, are you looking at just simply departments and programs?
Departments and agencies.
Or programs? I mean, it may just be a specific program that's a challenge that needs to be reviewed by, I mean, to me, we should cover all the bases. So it's, areas of government, programs, areas of government, departments or agencies. I mean, whatever you want to say, but I would cover the whole gamut because it may just be a program that's going off course, or a commission, or
Or a law that has to continue to be postponed because the
Yes.
agency can't enact it.
an ethics violation that can't be pursued because the ethics commission is the working.
Correct.
Okay, so, no, we seem to be returning to that topic a lot. On page
Well, it's a
4
good example of something we create.
That is in law, but they can't do it. But I don't think we have to investigate why.
No,
So
we know why.
it does say at the bottom of page 4 on line 20, as used in this section, an issue of significant public concern means anything that affects the state as a whole. So I don't know that you have to be
It doesn't,
anything more specific than that. If there's a program that affects the state as a whole and it's an issue of public concern,
that's not my question.
okay,
My concern is, how do we identify the programs, issues, departments that we're going to address?
I think that's GAC's responsibility, is to identify them.
But you have to identify a process of how you identify them is what I'm trying to say.
You don't want it to be random. You don't
You don't want it to be
that
random, you don't want it to be retaliatory.
agencies.
But we give them parameters in the bill on what they would count. So I guess that's just not
We
that.
did- That's the stuff at the top of page 5, and Allison and I have both marked that as possibly being able to be improved.
Okay,
Yeah, but I don't think we need to pre-select or have a process for how they would decide.
No,
I think we
what-
can just continue to grow.
No.
Is there something that you would add to that list?
oh, yes, I think this, the whole
Yeah, that
list
might be the
needs
way to-
review.
I agree. And I think what Senator Clarkson, and certainly correct me if I'm wrong, is suggesting is that the first charge of the committee is to develop that process. And sort of have it transparently available. So people who have the government accountability call them up and say, hey, we're investing in the program,
Right,
know what process the committee went through to
right,
choose them.
to score it and figure out what, well, I mean, to identify what priority problem it is that you need to address. And I think it can't just be random, it can't be retaliatory, it can't be.
If
It
you-
needs to have some science behind it as to why this I'll just use program because it's an easier thing to use, that why this program has risen to the top for review.
Yeah, if you
And I
recall,
think you
I
have
think
to-
New Mexico used the grading system. Utah used that little using evidence, like that little dial. And they sort of identified that if you fall into this part of the dial or this part of the grading system, then you would be up for a gap review.
That sounds great.
Yeah, but I would have us think about these, because I'm happy to think about these.
So you
Or
request
more bite.
an additional thing and something else in there too. Yeah, I'm open to it. I mean, I guess I just don't feel that concerned based on the list of things that they have opportunity to pick from. I guess I don't see it going off the rails that quickly. Because it hasn't, I think that largely that fear has been overblown.
I don't
But I
think it's
think
a fear. I think
the fear of it.
it's not a fear for me. It's a process that is more scientific than it is subjective,
Okay.
is all I'm trying to say.
And I think in the effort of trust building, having us say out front, we're gonna create an actual process and you're gonna know what the process is, again, helps tamp down some of that fear that I agree is overblown. I don't think this committee is gonna get together and go on a while, which ones. But I think the more we can sort of put it in the language that that's not what's gonna happen, the more trust we build.
The more you can say this is going to be an objective, that we're going to come up with a process where we identify what to review in an objective way, I think happier people will be.
Beautiful. I look forward to seeing language to accomplish that goal. And I will be
Thank you.
comfortable voting on.
On meet number or line 3, $100 million, that's probably needs to be updated. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Because whenever this was initially thought about, maybe 100 million was a lot different than it is.
Hey, I'd take 100 million tomorrow.
If I might make one suggestion, as you contemplate this, you're obviously thinking ahead to working with the other chamber on figuring out differences, but they had a process, and I'm not suggesting that you adopt this, but just to remind you that in H67, they had the Joint Fiscal Committee consulting with House and Senate leadership and then presenting a series of options to the Joint Fiscal Committee. So that's another way of thinking about this, that it would still be the committee's decision, but the menu, if you will, would have been presented to you by the Joint Fiscal Committee after hearing some input from legislative leadership. So I'm just putting that out there as an option. As I say, I'm not advocating for it, but
Sense for me as an option when it's joint fiscal doing it, because they're not the legislators. They're doing the work on behalf of the legislators. But now that we're shifting back to the idea that it's a committee of legislators, presumably that committee doesn't need input to know what the legislature is do you know, it seems sort of circular for a group of legislators to ask JFO to advise based on information they got from a different group of legislators.
yeah, I think that if I understand what the other chamber was thinking in that regard, it was that the benefit of Joint Fiscal Office putting some thought into that was that in identifying kind of significant issues that are worth the deep dive that's envisioned in this bill as well, that two things would benefit from Joint Fiscal Office. One is that they're a nonpartisan office, so they'd be looking at it with a nonpartisan filter, if you will. And then second, they would have perhaps a keen insight into which issues lent themselves to the kind of performance evaluation and oversight work and what would be necessary both for them, for the executive agencies that are being looked at, to be able to make it a successful process. So I hear you, it's legislative decisions at the end of the day, but I think that was at least the logic.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess what I was just sort of flagging is in 67, it wasn't the legislature doing the work, it was joint fiscal doing the work. So by shifting it back to the legislature doing the work, I think it's a slightly different construct, but I certainly would appreciate having joint fiscals involved. I think they have to be involved,
And the chief performance officer.
and the chief performance officer and the auditor's office.
Okay. Any other comments, questions, suggestions?
The only
Okay.
thing I offer is just to be mindful of what vehicle you use in the given the sand in the hourglass dwindling.
It's a very good description of chronological landscape.
Ooh,
So yeah, we'll take this up next week again, Tim, if you have any preference to the day of the week. I know your schedule is fairly fluid, but
I'm flexible.
okay. All right, and we'll definitely have, Justin Kenny back in. And maybe joint fiscal. Just to continue
That
to
makes sense, yeah.
provide some,
No, I think we need to hear from joint fiscal.
yeah. Okay. Well, I hope you have a great weekend, Tim, and enjoy, well, the rest of today looks good. I'm not sure about the weekend. It's going
Same
to.
to all of you. See ya.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, committee, we will have, an interesting week, I'm sure next week. We have the, voter, they call it something else now, but the Voting Rights Act back on, next week. I think I have it. Well, I can't remember if it's Tuesday or Wednesday, one of the 2 days. And we'll have, some more discussion with that. There's a redefinition of PAC, which we have not discussed yet, that the House Government Operations Committee would like us to insert into that bill. And,
It's on Tuesday.
okay. So that's one thing. My guess, again, just a guess, a prediction, but a guess is that that will go to a conference committee at some point. Because we've added a lot to it that we didn't have in the original one.